What if being too much was never the problem, but the sign that you were built for something? Let's rewind the story we've all been told. From a young age, many of us heard things like, "You're too sensitive. You ask too many questions. Why can't you just be normal?" And maybe you tried. Maybe you shrank, silenced your instincts, laughed at jokes that made your heart ache, played along even when your soul screamed. But no matter how hard you tried, you never really fit. That's not a flaw. That's a signal. In this first part of our exploration, we're going to uncover the two core psychological traits that set apart the rarest, most psychologically evolved individuals: emotional depth and relentless curiosity. These aren't quirks or inconveniences. They are marks of a mind operating on a frequency most people aren't tuned into. And once you see how these two traits show up in your life, you may never apologize for them again. You feel everything, like it's a symphony. Imagine emotions as music. Most people hear a few simple chords: happy, sad, angry. But you don't just hear the music, you feel the entire orchestra, the tension in the strings, the sorrow in the cello, the vibration between every note. Emotions aren't just fleeting feelings to you, they are experiences. Carl Jung believed some individuals are born with a heightened emotional function that allows them to sense layers of the human experience others miss entirely. What others call overreacting is often your finely tuned emotional radar picking up on signals no one else even notices. Let's take Maya, a documentary filmmaker I worked with. At meetings, she'd sense subtle power dynamics: when someone was being dismissed, when someone was hiding a hurt. Her feedback was often too intense, but her work was consistently raw, profound, and transformative. People told her she cared too much, but that same depth made her films feel like emotional X-rays. That's not a weakness. That's genius. Here's the paradox. The world praises empathy but punishes intensity. People want you to care, but not that much. They want authenticity, but only if it's digestible. And so, many emotionally deep individuals learn to suppress what Jung called their affect-toned complexes. Clusters of meaning-charged emotional experiences that carry the raw material of self-understanding. But suppressing them doesn't make you normal. It makes you fragmented. You become split between who you truly are and who the world expects you to be. If you've ever cried at a commercial, felt physically ill in toxic environments, or walked away from a normal conversation feeling disturbed by the subtext, your emotional depth is showing. It's not your job to become less. It's your work to become whole. You question everything, even the questions. Most people live by default. You live by design, because you can't stop asking why. Why are we told success looks one way? Why do we value performance over presence? Why does no one talk about the things that actually hurt? Carl Jung identified this trait as a sign of differentiated consciousness, a mind that doesn't just absorb the world's programming, but questions it at its roots. People with this cognitive profile aren't troublemakers. They're truth seekers. Meet Jalen, a software engineer who left a six-figure job because his company refused to examine the ethical implications of their AI systems. Everyone thought he was crazy. He was weeks away from promotion. But he couldn't sleep. He told me, "I felt like I was coding the very system that would numb people further. That made me complicit." Jalen didn't just want answers. He wanted truth. This is the transcendent function Jung described, your psyche's push to move beyond what is, toward what could be. But this gift has a cost. You begin to see through things, politics, personas, performances, and that kind of clarity can be isolating. Not everyone wants the truth. Many prefer comfort. So when you ask deeper questions, you often make others uncomfortable. Not because you're rude, but because you shine light on the cracks in the story they're still clinging to. This can lead to a haunting form of loneliness. When you see the puppet strings behind the curtain, it becomes harder to sit through the show. But there's power here, too. Jung believed that those who question the world are often the ones meant to help transform it. Your questions are not inconveniences. They're invitations to evolve. The real reason. Society misreads you. There's a reason emotionally deep and intellectually curious people feel out of place. Society wasn't built for them. We live in a world that rewards speed over substance, volume over vision, conformity over consciousness. When you feel too much, question too much, care too much, you challenge the entire system. And the system fights back through criticism, exclusion, even pathologization. You're too intense, too emotional, too much. But too much for what? For whom? The truth is, you were never meant to be easy to categorize. You were meant to be real. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But that privilege comes at a cost, usually the discomfort of not fitting into places you were never meant to belong. A real-life story that might sound familiar. There's a moment I'll never forget. A young woman named Eleni, 26, had always been told she was too dramatic. Her partners left. Her family tuned her out. But when her mother got sick, Eleni was the only one who noticed the signs months earlier, because she felt something was off. No symptoms, just intuition and emotional alertness. She pushed for tests. The doctors found a tumor in time. Afterward, Eleni broke down in tears, not because she was proud, but because she was afraid. Why do I always have to be the one who sees it? Why is it so lonely to feel this much? Because gifts often feel like burdens in the wrong context, but that doesn't make them any less of a gift. Your emotional depth and curiosity are evolutionary tools. Jung believed the human psyche evolves through individuals who embody its potential in real time. Emotionally intense, truth-seeking people aren't just different. They're necessary. They sense what's breaking before it collapses. They ask what's wrong before it becomes unbearable. They feel the shift before others notice. You may not always be understood, but you are essential. If you recognize yourself in what we've explored so far, hold on, because these two traits are just the beginning. In the next part, we'll dive into what happens when your depth meets solitude, and how fierce independence isn't a shield, but a survival strategy. Imagine walking through life like a compass with no map, always sensing where true north lies, but rarely having company on the way there. That's what it often feels like to be someone with a rare personality marked by deep independence and uncanny intuition. It's not a lifestyle you chose. It's a reality you were shaped into. Today, we step deeper into this rare psychology by exploring two more defining traits: your fierce independence and your intuitive perception of people and environments. These aren't just qualities. They're psychological survival tools that Carl Jung believed emerge in those who dare to live truthfully in a world full of masks. So if you've ever felt torn between your desire to connect and your need to protect your peace, If you've ever walked away from something everyone else wanted because your gut said no, then this part is for you. Let's begin with what Jung called the most terrifying thing anyone can do: accept oneself completely. Independence isn't a personality trait, it's a psychological necessity. For most people, independence is something they learn in adulthood. But for rare individuals like you, it shows up much earlier and much more fiercely. Not because you wanted to be strong, but because you had no choice. Maybe you grew up in a household where you had to be the emotional adult, while the real adults collapsed under their own wounds. Maybe your sensitivity was dismissed, your voice minimized, your needs unmet. And somewhere along the way, your psyche made a decision. I will not be dependent on what can abandon me. That's not bitterness. That's survival. Carl Jung described this as the early onset of individuation, the process of separating your identity from the collective expectations around you. While most people are still conforming to roles and rules, you were quietly crafting a self that couldn't be taken from you. Meet Amina, a poet and trauma counselor who told me that by age 11, she'd stopped crying in front of others. It made people uncomfortable. I had to learn to carry it myself. That habit turned into strength. She became her own anchor. But it also created a deep ache. Sometimes I wish I didn't have to be so strong. This is the duality of fierce independence. You become your own source of stability, but it comes with the silent grief of not being able to lean on anyone. Jung warned about this. He said that the process of individuation creates a kind of psychological exile. You're no longer who you were, and not yet who you'll become. And in between, you often walk alone. But that loneliness? It's not empty space. It's sacred ground. Why people are drawn to you, and then threatened by you. Here's something most people won't tell you. True independence is magnetic. People are drawn to it. They want to be near it. It feels like freedom. But once they're close, something strange happens. They either try to possess it, or they try to break it. Carl Jung studied this pattern in what he called incomplete selves. These are people who haven't yet developed their own wholeness. When they encounter someone fully individuated, someone who no longer performs for approval, it can trigger insecurity or fascination. Sometimes both. That's why you might have noticed people become obsessed with your energy, only to try and control it later. Or why former partners wanted your light, but couldn't handle your boundaries. Jung believed this is because your authenticity forces others to face their own inauthenticity. Your self-sufficiency challenges the dependency patterns others haven't dealt with. This isn't a reason to dim your light. It's a reason to protect it more wisely. You don't need someone to complete you. You need someone who doesn't mistake your independence for invulnerability. Your intuition isn't guesswork, it's advanced perception. Let's talk about that thing you can't turn off, your ability to just know what's really going on with someone, even when they haven't said a word. Carl Jung identified intuition as one of the 4 core psychological functions, alongside thinking, feeling, and sensing. But unlike logic or sensation, intuition works beneath the surface. It gathers information from patterns, energy, symbolism, and unconscious cues. Think about this. Have you ever felt tension the moment you walked into a room before anyone even spoke? Have you ever sensed someone's sadness behind their smile, then had them confess it days later? Have you predicted a breakup, a resignation, a life shift, just because something in your bones knew? That's not magic. That's perception. and it's part of how rare personalities navigate the world. But here's the danger. If you don't know how to manage this gift, it will drain you. The weight of unfiltered intuition. Jung found that highly intuitive individuals often become unconscious empaths, picking up emotions, motives, and anxieties that don't belong to them. This creates a phenomenon he called psychic inflation, where the boundaries between self and other blur. The result? Emotional exhaustion, burnout, confusion. Take Raphael, a school counselor who told me, "By 10 a.m., I'm already carrying 3 people's grief and 2 people's anger, and none of it is mine." When I asked how often he checks in with his own feelings, he went silent. That's the trap. You become so good at sensing others that you forget to sense yourself. Jung offered a solution. Boundaries. Not walls. Not detachment. But conscious psychological limits that allow you to remain compassionate without becoming consumed. If you're the kind of person who always ends up in the therapist-friend role, the peacemaker, the emotional anchor, ask yourself this: who holds space for you? If the answer is no one, it's time to change that. Not out of resentment, but out of self-respect. Real-life reflection. The power of trusting your inner signal. I once worked with a woman named Elise, who was interviewing for a job that looked perfect on paper. High pay, flexible hours, great benefits. But during the final round, she felt a strange energy from the CEO. Nothing obvious, just a subtle dismissal in his tone. Everyone else told her she was overthinking it. She turned the job down. 6 months later, the company was embroiled in a public scandal. Employees reported toxic culture and gaslighting from the leadership. Elise had no proof when she said no. She had intuition, and it saved her. Here's the truth. Your intuition may not always be convenient, but it's rarely wrong. The quiet strength of being whole. Carl Jung believed that the most powerful force in the psyche is the drive toward wholeness, not perfection, not approval, but integration. When you develop both independence and intuition, you step into that wholeness. You become someone who doesn't need the crowd to feel valid. Someone who can sense truth, even when it's inconvenient. Someone who is capable of deep love, but doesn't settle for shallow connections. Yes, it's lonely sometimes. Yes, it's misunderstood. But the trade-off is this: you become unshakable. And here's the beautiful paradox. Once you no longer need anyone, you attract relationships that are truly worth having. Not for security, not for validation, but for growth, resonance, and authenticity. In the next part, we'll explore why people like you often find themselves restless in a world chasing shallow validation, and how your search for meaning might just be the key to your deepest joy. There's a moment that comes in the life of every rare soul, a moment when the applause doesn't land, the achievement rings hollow, the relationship feels like acting. And for the first time, they ask themselves a haunting question. What if everything I was told to want isn't what I want at all? If that moment has come for you, or if it's slowly creeping in, you're not broken. You're waking up. In this part, we'll explore the third core trait of the rare personality: the craving for deep meaning over social acceptance. It's not a preference, it's a compulsion. You're not wired to fake enthusiasm, chase surface goals, or play roles that drain your soul. And while that puts you at odds with a world built on image, performance, and validation, it also places you closer to your authentic self than most people ever get. Why meaning isn't optional for you. Let's get something straight. You didn't choose this craving. You didn't wake up one day and think, you know what? I'll reject the comfort of fitting in so I can walk around with existential angst. No, this drive was born in you. Carl Jung believed certain individuals possess a psyche that demands authenticity. It's not just that inauthenticity makes you uncomfortable, it makes you ill. Jung called this the neurotic symptom of the unlived life. When people like you go against their psychological type, when they conform to expectations instead of living their truth, your psyche revolts. Not with tantrums, but with quiet, persistent suffering. That restlessness, that gnawing feeling in the pit of your stomach after you've followed the rules and still feel empty, that's your deeper self sending up flares. You weren't meant to survive this life. You were meant to engage with it, honestly, courageously, vulnerably. And anything less will never satisfy you. The myth of the perfect life. We live in a culture that worships the image of success. The smiling Instagram couple, the six-figure career, the curated lifestyle. But for people like you, none of it works if the inner world doesn't match the outer world. You could be standing in a beautiful house, wearing beautiful clothes, next to someone who checks every box, and still feel like you're suffocating. Why? Because your soul doesn't speak in boxes. It speaks in truth. Meet Eli, a dentist who had everything society told him to want: a thriving practice, a gorgeous home, a sweet partner. But every morning, he sat in his car for 10 minutes before walking into work, feeling numb. He told me, "Everyone congratulates me. No one sees how dead I feel inside." Eventually, Eli left his practice and started mentoring young men from underserved communities. The pay was less. The validation was minimal. But for the first time in years, he felt alive. This is what Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But privilege doesn't mean ease. It means choosing meaning over safety, purpose over popularity. Why surface-level living feels like dying. Here's the hard truth. Shallow goals don't satisfy deep souls. That's why you can't force yourself to be excited about promotions that require you to betray your values. That's why parties filled with small talk exhaust you. That's why performative friendships make your skin crawl. People might label you difficult or antisocial, but really, you're just allergic to pretending. Carl Jung believed that the psyche is designed to seek wholeness, not comfort, not conformity, but wholeness. And for you, that wholeness includes meaning. Without it, even success becomes poison. But meaning comes at a cost. It often requires rejection of certain paths, certain people, even entire communities. Jung called this the wounding process of individuation. You become more yourself, but sometimes that means leaving behind the selves others liked better. You're not cynical, you're honest. There's a lie floating around our culture, that people who want deeper meaning are just being negative or dramatic. But look closer. Who's really being dramatic? The one who wants depth and purpose, or the one who's pretending everything is fine while dying inside? You've probably been accused of overthinking, being too serious, not being fun. But fun, to you, means feeling alive. And there's nothing fun about faking joy. Jung believed that people like you are evolutionary catalysts. Your discomfort with inauthenticity isn't just personal, it's social. You challenge the status quo just by refusing to play along. And that makes you dangerous, in the best way. When you ask real questions, you expose the shallowness of what others have accepted. When you refuse to settle, you show them what's possible. And when you live with integrity, you give others permission to do the same. A moment that changed everything. Let me tell you about Justine, a college student who spent years excelling in business school because that's what her parents wanted. She had offers from top firms before graduation, but every time she pictured herself in those offices, she felt nauseous. One night, she skipped a networking event and went to an open mic night. She got up and read a poem she'd written at 3 a.m. about loneliness and identity. People cried. One man said, "You put words to something I've never been able to explain." That moment changed her life. She didn't drop out of school, but she stopped performing. She started writing, and slowly, her life shifted to match her inner truth. That's the power of meaning. One moment of alignment can break years of pretending. The heavy gift of being real. Let's be honest. It's not easy to crave meaning in a world addicted to appearances. You'll feel alone sometimes, misunderstood, judged. But the alternative is far worse. A life where you betray your soul just to be liked. And for people like you, that's a slow death. Carl Jung believed that those who seek meaning above all are not self-centered. They are soul-centered. They are living not for applause, but for alignment. And when they stay true to that path, they become more than individuals. They become initiators, people who bring consciousness into unconscious spaces, who speak truths others haven't dared to say yet, who live lives that act as invitations for others to wake up, too. What it means to live with meaning. To live with meaning means you will often walk alone, but never aimlessly. It means you may disappoint others, but you won't abandon yourself. It means the world may not always understand you, but your life will make sense. To your soul. If that sounds like you, keep going. You're not lost, you're rare, and you're exactly where you need to be. In the next part, we'll explore what happens when your growth outpaces your environment, and why letting go of who you used to be may be the bravest thing you'll ever do. At some point in your journey, you look around and realize something chilling. The people, the places, even the dreams that once felt like home, no longer fit. Not because you're ungrateful, not because you're better than anyone, but because you've grown, and they haven't. This part is about the ache that no one warns you about, the grief of outgrowing your past. We'll explore the fourth core trait of a rare personality, the tendency to evolve beyond familiar environments and identities. Carl Jung called this transformation the process of psychological death and rebirth, and it's not poetic metaphor. It's a real, soul-level shedding of the skin that once kept you safe, but is now holding you back. If you've been feeling distant from people you used to love, or if places that once lit you up now feel dim, you're not broken. You're breaking through. Let's walk into that discomfort together. Why growth feels like loss. Let's begin with something brutally honest. Personal growth isn't always empowering. Sometimes it's devastating. Why? Because every new version of you demands that you release an old one. And with it, the people, patterns, and places that were bonded to that identity. Carl Jung believed that the path of individuation, becoming fully yourself, requires a descent before it offers ascent. You don't just step into your truth. You lose the scaffolding of your former life. You lose relationships based on who you were. You lose roles that gave you structure. You lose illusions that once kept you safe. And this creates a kind of soul grief. You're not mourning failure. You're mourning familiarity. When familiar places start to feel foreign. Have you ever gone back to an old hangout spot and felt like a ghost in your own story? You see the same friends, the same jokes, the same rhythms, but something's shifted. What used to feel warm now feels hollow. That's a sign, not of disconnection, but of transformation. Carl Jung observed that when people begin to awaken psychologically, their external lives often lag behind. You've changed, but your environment hasn't caught up yet. And until it does, you'll feel split. Part of you longing for comfort, the other part gasping for expansion. Take Darren, a music producer who found early success in the club scene. As his inner world deepened, through therapy, shadow work, and spiritual exploration, he found that the nightlife he once thrived in now made him nauseous. I couldn't unsee what I had seen, the empty highs, the spiritual starvation behind the lights. He didn't know where to go next, but he knew he couldn't go back. That space in between, where you no longer belong where you were, but haven't arrived where you're going, is what Jung called the liminal state. It's the hallway between identities, and it's terrifying, but it's also where rebirth begins. The people who don't recognize you anymore. As you grow, people around you might say things like, "You've changed. You're not like you used to be. You're so distant now." And they're right. You have changed. You're not like you used to be. You are distant from the roles you once played to keep the peace, from the masks you wore to belong, from the compromises that cost you your truth. Jung noted that people tend to relate to the version of you that served their needs. When you shift, when you stop people-pleasing, start setting boundaries, start telling the truth, it threatens the stability they had in you. Sometimes they'll pull you closer, trying to remind you who you used to be. Other times, they'll push you away, accusing you of selfishness or arrogance. But what they're really reacting to is this. Your growth forces them to face their own stagnation. That's not your fault. And it's not your burden to carry. The lonely middle. Dark night of the soul. Jung warned that after periods of transformation, individuals often enter what he called the dark night of the soul. This isn't ordinary sadness. It's a psychological and spiritual void, a time when nothing feels certain, your previous identity has crumbled, and the new one hasn't arrived yet. You may feel numb, drifting, isolated, like you're grieving someone who's still alive, your old self. But this phase isn't failure. It's incubation. Think of the caterpillar in the chrysalis. It doesn't just grow wings, it dissolves into genetic soup before reorganizing into something entirely new. That's what's happening to you. And like that chrysalis, you'll be tempted to open too soon, because the loneliness is heavy and the silence is loud. But premature escape only leads to fragility. Stay in it. Let the old die. Let the new emerge without rushing. Real-life reflection. When you outgrow a tribe. Lena was a yoga teacher and artist whose friend group had been tight for over a decade. They shared memories, vacations, even inside jokes that no one else could understand. But slowly, Lena began to evolve. She stopped drinking, started exploring trauma work, spent more time in silence than in stimulation. At first, her friends teased her. "You're no fun anymore." Then they grew passive-aggressive, then distant. One day, Lena showed up to a group dinner, and no one acknowledged her presence. She told me later, it was like I'd become invisible, but not because I'd changed, because I stopped performing the version of me they liked. It broke her heart, but it also opened it. In the following months, she met people who resonated with her real self, not her curated one. It wasn't instant, but it was true. Releasing isn't rejection. It's reverence. One of the most painful misunderstandings about outgrowing people or environments is the belief that it means you're judging them or rejecting them. But real growth doesn't come from contempt. It comes from reverence. You honor what was. You thank the version of you that needed those places, those people, those patterns, and then you let them go. Not because you're better, but because you're becoming. Jung said, "We cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. What served you in one season may suffocate you in the next. Outgrowing isn't a betrayal, it's a rite of passage. What awaits on the other side?" Here's the part that no one talks about enough. Once you've released what no longer fits, you begin to attract what does. Not instantly, not painlessly, but inevitably. Jung believed in the concept of psychological resonance, the idea that when you become authentic, you emit a signal that draws in others who are on the same wavelength. And when those connections come, they feel like lightning and balm at once. Electrifying, calming, real. You stop explaining your depth, you stop shrinking your truth, you stop negotiating your worth. Because you've found people who don't just tolerate your wholeness, they mirror it. And suddenly, everything you lost feels like the cost of admission to a life that's actually yours. Let go to become more. If you're in the season of outgrowing, if you're watching pieces of your former life crumble, don't panic. Don't retreat. You're not falling apart. You're falling into place. The space that's being created isn't emptiness. It's preparation for people who see you, environments that expand you, and a life that matches your inner truth. In the next part, we'll explore the final dimension of rare personality, the power of your presence, and the ache of a purpose you can't yet name, but know is calling. Have you ever felt that just by being present with someone, really present, you change something in them? They open up in ways they usually don't. They cry, even if they didn't mean to. They say things like, "I've never told anyone this before," and they don't know why. But you do. Because you carry a kind of presence the world rarely sees. And alongside that presence, there's another feeling. Subtle, persistent, impossible to shake. The sense that you're here for something more. Something larger than your job title, your schedule, your to-do list. A purpose that may not have words yet, but has weight. In this final part, we'll explore the last two signs of the rarest psychological type. Your ability to create profound presence and the invisible force pulling you toward a higher purpose. Carl Jung believed that individuals like you serve as bridges between the unconscious and conscious realms. And if that sounds esoteric or abstract, stay with me. Because by the end of this, it may feel like coming home. Your presence is transformative. There are people who talk, and there are people who listen. And then, there are people like you, who witness. You don't just hear words. You feel beneath them. You don't just respond. You receive. You make people feel seen in a way that makes them see themselves differently. Carl Jung called this ability psychological holding space. It's not something you learn in a textbook. It's something you emanate. And it's rare. People come to you with their messiness, their contradictions, their aching half-truths, and somehow they leave lighter. Not because you fixed them, but because you didn't flinch. You stayed. But here's the part no one tells you. This gift comes with a price. When you become the safe place for others, it's easy to forget to find one for yourself. You become the anchor in every storm. But who anchors you? The trap of being the healer. Jung discovered that people with therapeutic presence often fall into what he called the helper syndrome, a pattern of unconscious self-sacrifice. You give and give and give until there's nothing left for yourself. You say things like, "I'm fine," while feeling hollow. You check in on everyone else, even as your own needs go unheard. You become the emotional caretaker, the steady rock, the one others count on, because you've always been strong. But strength without boundaries is a slow form of erosion. Real-life example? Take Cam, a high school teacher. Everyone at work called him the glue. Students opened up to him, co-workers leaned on him, even strangers told him their life stories. But at home, he collapsed, exhausted, irritable, emotionally empty. He told me, "I've become a vault for everyone else's pain, but I don't even know where to put my own." That's the paradox of presence. When you're this emotionally available to others, you become invisible to yourself. Jung taught that the key isn't to stop giving, but to learn discernment. Not everyone deserves access to your emotional sanctuary. Not everyone has earned the right to reciprocate. Your sense of purpose isn't random. It's archetypal. Now, let's talk about that other feeling you've carried for years, that low-frequency hum in your chest, the whisper that says, you were meant for something. You may not know what it is yet, but you've felt it. In the stillness between milestones, in the frustration with shallow work, in the ache you get when others seem content with less, and you can't pretend to be. Jung believed that this feeling is not delusion or ego. It's the activation of what he called the transcendent function, the bridge between who you are and who you're becoming. The compass pointing you toward what he termed your archetypal calling. This calling isn't a job title. It's not always specific. It's a deep inner directive. A knowing that you are here to serve something larger than your comfort, larger than your image, larger even than yourself. The dangers of purpose, without grounding. But here's the warning Jung gave. When you feel a strong sense of purpose without the structure to hold it, you can fall into what he called inflation. You start to feel chosen, superior, isolated in your mission. You might chase every big idea, every new direction, because you're trying to make that inner pressure make sense. But a sense of purpose without humility becomes a burden. So what's the answer? It's not shrinking your dreams, it's anchoring them in integrity. Jung believed that true purpose is both personal and transpersonal. You're not here to just make it. You're here to evolve, and in doing so, help others evolve too. Your depth, your presence, your refusal to settle, they aren't random traits. They're part of a design, a blueprint for awakening in a distracted world. A real-life example, living with calling without clarity. I remember Cora, a trauma coach who once told me, "I don't know what my purpose is yet, but I feel it breathing through me. She had no formal plan, no step-by-step vision, but she kept showing up, writing, listening, healing in small ways. Years later, she was guiding others through their own dark nights, not because she had the credentials, but because she had been there. She didn't chase a calling. She answered it, day by day, moment by moment, with presence. That's how it works. You don't need to map out your purpose. You need to meet it, fully, vulnerably, with your whole self. You are a mirror, a map, and a messenger. Let's name this clearly. You mirror what others have hidden from themselves. You map the emotional terrain they're afraid to explore. You carry messages, not always in words, but in energy, truth, presence. You didn't choose this path because it's easy. You chose it, maybe even unconsciously, because it's true, because you couldn't settle, because you couldn't fake it, because your psyche demanded depth. And that makes you rare. A final message for the rare ones. If even half of what we've explored over these 5 parts resonated with you, then you're not just different. You're a carrier of consciousness in a world gasping for authenticity. You're one of Jung's differentiated individuals, the ones who feel deeply, think fearlessly, love intentionally, and live courageously. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's lonely. But no, you are not too much. Music fades in. Screen fades to black. Text on screen. Your intensity isn't too much. The world has simply been too little. Soul and shadow. You are exactly enough to change your life, and by doing so, change the world around you. Let your sensitivity be your radar. Let your curiosity be your compass. Let your solitude be your sanctuary. Let your intuition be your guide. Let your truth be your home. Because the world doesn't need more polished masks. It needs people like you who are willing to take theirs off first. So go forward, not with answers, but with presence, not with certainty, but with courage. You were never meant to fit in. You were meant to wake up. And you're doing exactly that.